All right, welcome back to Making the Argument. And this episode today was actually brought to us by a member of our community on Circle. So we want to thank Kat for this recommendation. And I'm going to be honest, when I first saw the recommendation, I thought it was something of a critique. Like, we had failed to address something in a bunch of episodes that we'd done previously, because what Kat wants to know is, she's like, look, you guys have done a good job talking about some of the problems with modern feminism and dating and how hard it's been for guys out there. She goes, but what about all of us non-304s? What about all of us non-club girls who do want to be traditional wives, and we do want to find, traditional men, and we are tired of being lumped in with the cast of the whatever podcast anytime the frustration kind of comes out on this podcast. And she goes, can you please send some help to the gals out there that want to find the sort of guys you're talking about, to build the sort of marriages and relationships and families that you guys consistently talk about and advocate for. So, Kat, again, I had to read it a couple of times. Tina had to come in and say, no, honey, this is what she means. She's got a great point. We need to address this. And so I want to thank you. I want to thank Tina for walking me through it and having to womansplain it to me so I properly understood. So what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to go through this whole concept of, dating in the 21st century, right? Like, what do you want? How do you attract the sort of person that you're looking for? Where do you actually find them? Because that's changed as well. We're going to talk about things like, what are the red flags that you absolutely have to look for? The deal breakers, which should shut everything down right away. And then we're going to ask the question, considering all of this, is it really possible in the world we currently find ourselves in? We're going to discuss all of that and more on this episode of Making the Argument, powered by Good Ranchers.
Well, again, welcome everyone to this episode of Making the Argument. I'm particularly interested in this topic because I'm on a mission to find my wife in 2024, so that is going to be a lot of fun. But thank you to everyone who has helped us choose the many options we've gone with for this episode and many more. Don't forget that in the Episode Ideas channel in our Circle chat, you can vote on ideas by clicking the up button and everything else. But let's get right into the show.
All right, as always, I am your host, Nick Freitas, trad husband. With us today is my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees. Hi, babe.
Hello, everyone.
And then, of course, we have a resident historian and political prognosticator, Master Hines.
How do I even introduce myself to this one? I just want to say that I was dragged into this under duress. I did not vote for this topic. No, I'm just kidding.
No,
it'll be a good episode.
Christian is a fellow traveler on this quest.
I don't care, Christian, because guess what? This isn't mud democracy. You just have to show up and participate.
I walked into that one.
And then, of course, we have Hamilton, the good Hamilton, the one that doesn't like central banking. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump into this. So obviously, as we're discussing this today, this was inspired by Kat from our community. She had some various questions that she had. We're going to try to get to some of those. We're also going to be talking about this. Obviously, Tina's going to be sharing her perspective, taking this from a woman's perspective. I'm going to hit it from kind of the guy's perspective. And one of the ways that we wanted to do this was to talk very, very briefly about how Tina and I met. So anybody that's been watching the show for a while probably has heard us tell this story before, so I'm going to give the condensed version. We met in high school, our freshman year of high school. We went to a very, very small school, like graduating class of 27. So again, for all of you who have been wondering, like, oh my gosh, like, how did he manage to like convince her to marry him? She had a really, really small pool of options.
So there it is. Make sure you go to the smallest pool possible, marry the person right out of high school. Done. Next episode.
Yeah, I'm kidding. Right. There we go. So there you go. You're welcome.
That's one of the reasons we get so much criticism. Yeah. Whenever we're saying no, there's still good people out there. People will criticize us because we found each other young, but some of these principles I do think still apply, and so we're gonna touch on. They do,
and I want women. So again, because a woman inspired the show, I want to give women kind of some insight into kind of the thought process men are going through. So when I was in high school, I'm sure this shocks nobody. Like I was not a ladies' man. I was not, I didn't date a lot. I didn't do any of that stuff. And part of it, I mean, I think, and again, Tina was there the whole time, so she could probably tell you, part of that was like, from a very early age, I really did believe that dating was about finding someone that you were going to marry. I didn't think it was something that you just kind of did for fun or for experimental purposes. Like I really thought it was more like, if you can't possibly imagine yourself potentially being married to this person, why would you waste their time? Why would you waste yours? Why would you, hurt somebody else? Why would you let them mess with you? And I also had this kind of standard of like, look, men are supposed to do certain things. We're supposed to open doors. We're supposed to be nice. We're supposed to be polite. We're supposed to be protectors. Like, and so that's kind of how I looked at things. And what I learned very early on, even at a small, Christian school, was that was not rewarded. Right. Like that was not typically rewarded by, the girls in the school or, the ones I was attracted to or whatnot. Like that was my impression. And so on top of that, what I also witnessed was, some of my buddies, I had one buddy in particular that I felt like it was like, gosh, dang, man, like he treats girls horribly.
Yeah. I promise not to name names, but he was like, this guy was toxic. He was like the woman with the drama, but as a dude. And
but they ate it up.
He would make girls feel like he hated them one moment and make them feel all insecure. And then all of a sudden he would turn on the charm and they would all melt. And I always looked at it like, oh my gosh, these women are so weak. I can't believe they're falling for this garbage.
But the thing is like I'm looking at it. It's a buddy of mine. And I mean, Tina gave a very... it's kind of a harsh version of it, but not untrue. So like I'm watching this, and I remember like my freshman year I'm watching it, my sophomore year I'm watching it, and by my junior year I was starting to get kind of like fed up with this. I'm like, this is garbage. Like I am trying to be, and I ended up being not only like friend zoned, but I ended up being like girls would talk to me, but I was the buddy, right? I was the friend because I would listen, and they thought I gave pretty decent advice, right? When and stuff like that. So
which if you're a friend zoned guy, sometimes that also makes you the rebound guy.
Yeah. And so it was probably my junior year of high school where honestly my attitude was screw this. Like I have been told that this is the proper and the chivalrous and the nice and the polite and all these other things to do. And on top, it's and I was like, I played sports and I did other stuff, but I'm like, this isn't working. And for a while there, I kind of got jaded. I got jaded a little bit. And there was this one episode I will never forget. There's this one episode where this one gal, really, really nice, totally cool, pretty gal and the whole deal. And I was just, you know what, forget this. I'm going to do what everybody else does. Like, I'm just going to, kind of date for fun and I remember like instantly feeling bad. Like it's not like anything happened or anything like that, but just like instantly feeling bad that I hurt somebody because I wasn't serious. And I remember thinking like, look, I don't know what the rules are anymore. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I know this whole nice guy crap doesn't seem to be working. And I just don't want to be the sort of guy that, treats women in a way that's like flippant or disregards them or, makes them think, or potentially puts them in a position of think there's going to be more than there actually is. Like, I don't want to be either of those guys. And this is kind of like junior year. I'm having this epiphany. And then senior year, right? Like, cause Tina dated somebody else in high school. I had kind of like somebody else in high school. But we'd always been friends, but she was kind of off with her group. I was off with mine. And
we were friends with a lot of tension.
Yeah.
There was a lot of tension there.
We used to argue a lot. One, I just thought she was way too hot for me. So like,
whatever.
This is what's important about this story. Because of that stuff, which a lot of people look at what I just described and say, dude, that's not big baggage. That's not any of that other crap. Yeah, I know it is. I'm not claiming this is really bad. I'm just letting you know it didn't take a lot for me to realize this sucks. I don't like it. And the moment like Tina and I started hanging out more and it started to become more evident that we liked each other, I was a lot more aloof. I was a lot more guarded. Like there was no way I was going to demonstrate like a significant amount of affection. Like I was being really, really close hold to the point that when I left for basic training, so we started dating kind of like late
November
1997.
Of our senior year.
97. Yeah. Late 97, we start dating. And then I leave for Army basic training in June of 98. So like right at like 2 weeks after we graduate. And at that point, I'm pretty sure I'm just like in love with this girl. But there's no way in hell
he had never told me that.
I had never told her that. There was no way I was going to tell her that, because I had also like, I kept waiting for the other shoe to fall, right? Like I kept waiting to find out that, hey, idiot, you really thought this girl liked you, when in reality, X, Y, and Z. Or I'm going to go off to, maybe she does really like me, but the moment I go off to basic training and I'm gone for like 3 months solid, like there's no way that
there's a reason there's a bunch of cadences about Jody taking your girl.
Yeah. Yeah. And understand something. When Jody was like the name that everybody in the military gives to the guy that basically steals your girl when you're away at basic training. Right. And so right before I leave for basic, I know I'm going to be gone for like 3 months, and, I'm trying to set myself up for two things. One, I'm trying to set myself like, I don't want to get hurt. And two, I don't want to feel like weak or vulnerable. And so I tell her right before I leave for basic, I'm like, look, I'm going to be gone for 3 months. If you want to date other people, you can. I'm clearly not going to be. But I just, and that made her mad. And I'll let her kind of describe that. But that made her mad. But the reason why I needed to say that is I needed to know that if she was going to stick with me all throughout basic training, it's because she was going to do that she genuinely cared for me. And, because that was, for me, that was going to be the proof. That was going to be the proof that this was something that was going to last and was going to stand distance and stress and everything else, or it wasn't. And I mean, as much as I didn't want it to happen, I'm like, oh yeah, really, like super hot girl in a college town, because we were in Chico, California, and Chico University was known for being like party school and the whole deal. I'm like, there's like, I barely stand a chance when I'm standing there. How am I going to stand a chance when I'm in Fort Benning, Georgia? And we can't call, we can't talk. All we can do is write letters, and we didn't even know what the frequency with that would be. And so I told her that, and I left. And I remember going off to 30th AG in Fort Benning, Georgia, and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like if she steps out or if she does something like that, I'm just going to be devastated. I'm going to be absolutely devastated. And I got like one call with her early on at 30th AG, and definitely a lot more affectionate on that phone call.
Still didn't tell me you love me though.
Still didn't say I love you, because I needed to know that was, and she, like for the first 2 weeks, we got no mail because everything was getting figured out and the whole deal. But she wrote me every single day I was in basic training. And like at that point I was like, okay, wow, this is, and there's still a part of you that thinks, okay, but is it real? Like you really wanted to believe it's real, but you got, as sure, week 1, week 2, week 3, but all of a sudden you get into like week 8, week 9, and buddies are getting Dear John letters. And, again, I never had to worry about that because there was never a break in the letters. I was getting a letter every day telling me what she was doing, telling me that, how much she missed me, the whole deal. That and like one of my best friends in the world, Eric Ewing, who is Lily's godfather. He was also there. There's actually a kind of funny story. He was also there to make sure that, Tina wasn't, like, I didn't put him up to that. He was just a good friend and looking out. And he was like, yeah, man, super loyal. But yeah, that's what really demonstrated to me. And I remember she flew out for basic training, showed up and was just, oh my gosh, just smoking hot.
Oh, come on. All right.
But we go there,
Move along.
go there, and we were on the banks of the river, the Chattahoochee, about to go get dinner, and my folks were out there, and Tina was out there, and that was the first time I told her I loved her. And then we were married about 6 months later.
Yeah.
So I say that to kind of set the boundary of like what it was like for us from kind of my perspective, and why what attracted me to Tina. And by the way, what attracted me to Tina was not just her looks. The other thing that really attracted me to Tina when we were in high school was she had the ability to play she could have been the mean popular girl super easy. Never took that route. She was always like, she chose her friendships, and she chose the things that she would do and the people that she would hang out, and what I felt to be a very, very genuine manner based off of kind of the character of the people around her and whether or not they were genuine. She really didn't care about a lot of the stuff that people get caught up with, like status in schools. And that really spoke to me. So there was the values, there was the integrity, and then there was the looks. I'm not going to lie, but those things all factored in. And talk about all of that to kind of lead into this first topic that we're going to hit, and that is, all right, to the ladies out there, like, what do you want? And I mean this very specific, because it's one thing to say, oh, I just want a traditional husband, or I want a real man, or I want that. No, but what do you mean by that? Like, what do you want? And so, I mean, I'm going to hand this over to Tina here real quick and just kind of ask her, like, what were you looking for? And when we say traditional, or we say masculine, or we say stuff like that, what did that mean to you?
Well, first of all, a lot of times if a woman's being really, really honest, and sometimes women won't be honest about that. She kind of wants you to play the guessing game and guess what she wants, because she actually doesn't know what she wants either. And she's hoping that you'll guess correctly and she'll get to recognize what she wants through your guess. I'm not kidding. But
can you guys understand at least how unfair that feels to us?
No, I understand. But that's just it, is sometimes our minds are so complex that we're struggling to weed out what society has told us we should want versus what we really want. And there is sort of a, let me explain this. Society has basically told women that you should want a guy that's going to cry with you, and he's going to get all excited whenever you get your hair done and your nails done, and he's going to compliment you on your shoes and notice all these things. The truth is, guys don't typically notice that stuff. And we're told, oh, your guy doesn't care about you if he doesn't notice all this stuff. And it's interesting because on the other side of it, us women, we tend to try to weed out, okay, is this my thought or is this society's thought? Am I supposed to feel this way? Am I not supposed to feel this way? And ultimately, really what it is we want a masculine man. And society, I feel like, has sort of trained us in our minds to look at things much more superficially and ignore our biological responses to men. Women, I mean, like, you can even just look at birth control. Chemical birth control is, responsible for changing the way women see a man. If she's on birth control, she will be more attracted to more feminine men and less attracted to masculine men. And it has to do with what she smells through the pheromones, and it has to do with what's visually appealing to her. Because it's changed her hormones, she then is not as attracted to men that would be beneficial to her reproductive system. So, when you look at the way we're wired, women have a tendency to want someone that is strong, where you're likely to have children that are going to be strong and keep the line going. I mean, that's kind of like the underlying thing. And society has really tried to train that out of us. And chemical birth control has also damaged women in this way and caused more feminine men on the other end of it. Because what happens is, while we're trying to figure out what we want, we're ignoring our body. We're ignoring our own mind.
Let me ask you something on that, because this goes back to what you said when you said, well, look, if sometimes women are being honest, sometimes we can't fully articulate what it is that we want, or we haven't totally figured out what we want. And so sometimes it's like men guess and like, oh yeah, I like that. So here's my question. Do you think a part of that has to do with the fact that two things are going on simultaneously? And I think this is something that I don't think guys properly understand sometimes. I didn't properly understand it until you and I were talking about this at one point. And that was, at the same time society is punishing men for being more masculine, it's also telling women they're not supposed to like those masculine guys.
Right.
And so it's not just an attack on men, right? That attack on masculinity also ends up being an attack, at least socially, with respect to trying to change women's expectations for what it is they're supposed to like. Like you are being force-fed a version of what you're supposed to like. You don't like it. It's not what you would naturally choose, but the social pressure can be overwhelming at times. Like, is that a fair description of that?
I think so. And I also think that when women are trying to figure out what they want in a man, she should not be on chemical birth control. Now, I know this is like a crazy thought, but hormonal birth control is really bad for women on a lot of levels. It's bad for your so many things, cancer, blood clots, how your mind works, your skin, your aging process. It is bad for everything. So I'm not just saying this because I'm a Christian and I don't believe you should have sex before marriage. I am also saying this because chemical birth control is bad for you on a scientific level. And so I think women should not be on that while they're trying to figure out what they want, because it screws with your head. And I will tell you, I mean, a lot of women don't want to admit this, but hormonally, I mean, the week before our period, like, we are freaking crazy. And we feel like everybody, listen, I'm just trying to tell you how strong hormones are, is that in my mind, the week before my cycle like hits, I am looking at everybody like, why has everyone lost their minds? Everyone's just getting under my skin. Everything is irritating, every little sound, every little smell. And I'm just like, ooh, I can't even stand myself right now. And it'll just suddenly click. And this is how I am. And I encourage other women to be the same, because we get really defensive when we shouldn't. Like, women hate it when you're like, are you on your period? But honestly, you guys, admit it, like, own it, and address it, because it's on you. It is on us to make sure we don't behave like psychopaths. And when we know that our period is coming, we need to go, you know what? Let me just let everybody in the house know. I think I'm due for my period very soon. I think I'm a little crazy right now. So if I'm really short with you, maybe it's not your fault. It's probably my period. And that lets them know that maybe they should be careful with you, and not be,
I'm going to go wash the
and
dishes,
prodding.
babe.
Okay, so the reason...
What do you do if you're just always crazy?
Well, that's you, though. I mean, that's not, I don't know. You got hormones.
Because I mean, we've done whole podcasts on how, like, all of society has gone insane.
Well,
so.
I mean, keep in mind, like, everybody's doing stuff that messes with their hormones. So what my point is, hormones are extremely strong. They can make you crazy. They can make you sick. They can make you hallucinate. They can make you do all kinds of crazy things if your hormones aren't really balanced. And so, of course, if you're taking hormonal birth control, it is going to alter the way you see the opposite sex. It just is, especially because it deals with your sexual reproductive system. And so I am saying, women, if you're trying to figure out what you really want in a man, like whether it's visual, whether it's, his actions and things like that, you probably need to get off the hormonal birth control for a while and, like, get back to who you really are in order to recognize that.
So that's a good first step. Obviously, don't do stuff that's going to drastically inhibit your own judgment, chemically when you're trying to find someone that you want to spend the rest of your life with. And then on the other side of that, also be willing to kind of push back against those social or cultural norms that you think are, kind of like, we'll just say perverse, right? It's this idea of like, no, Hollywood is telling you you're not supposed to like that sort of guy. And so that really is something that when we talk about, okay, what do you really want? I think that more and more, if you are more in that traditional mold, right? That's what you want. I think both sides have to understand that you are going to feel outside pressure that you're not supposed to feel that way.
Exactly.
You're going to feel that. And so you're going to have to consciously decide to, kind of reject that and push through with what it is that, no, you want.
Yeah.
And I will say that, when we've talked a lot about,
Hamilton has something to say. Can we?
I've got something really good here. As we're having this conversation about what women want, there's something that I noticed. Nick, you were going to go to basic training whether or not Tina wanted you to go. You were going to go to basic training whether or not she loved you or whether or not she was going to marry you. You were convinced that that was your path, the direction you were going to take in life. So I have a thought here. Could it be that while potentially women may not know what they want in a man, what they definitely want is a man who knows what they want in life and who has a direction for their own life? I just wanted to propose that as a potential answer to this question based off of what y'all were saying.
That's absolutely true, Hamilton. And to that effect, there are women who recognize that a guy is on a certain path and she doesn't like the path he's on, but she really likes the guy. So she tries really hard to pull him off that path. And I will say this, if you aren't cut out to be a military wife, don't you dare do it. Don't do it. The reason I say this is because he's on a path. He has this duty-bound thing in him. You are not going to, it's not that you can't get him to come off of that path and do what you want, but he will resent you for that. And you will lose respect for him because he didn't follow through and he didn't do what originally attracted you to him in the first place, was that sense of duty. And so, man, recognize what you want and see if you're up to the task. Like, some jobs that men have are service-oriented jobs, and they take a certain type of woman. If you are really needy, if you are high maintenance, you need to recognize that about yourself. And yeah, you can adjust that. Like, I'm a really big fan of women recognizing that we have faults too. And there are areas where I could do better. And I think we should be willing to change things about ourselves that are more negative, things that are maybe they're kind of negative quirks or whatever. We should be willing to work on those for the people that we love. This whole idea that, like, I'm not changing for any man, blah, 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 that's toxic. That's garbage. There are so many things I have changed in order to try to be a better wife for Nick because it benefits both of us. So, you know, it's like that. Basically, this whole idea of, for instance, me recognizing when I'm hormonal and crazy, I have chosen that I'm gonna recognize this, and I'm going to do the work to not take that out on my family. And women sometimes get this idea that since I'm, you know, since it's that time of the month, I have carte blanche to just be a B word to everybody. And that's not okay. You cannot be a monster for 1 week out of the month every single month. That is not okay to your family. So you have to rein that in and control it. So anyway, but I absolutely agree that women do want a man that's on a track because ultimately a traditional woman wants a man who is going to be able to support her and their children and be able to raise them. You know, I don't think necessarily anybody needs to be super wealthy, but you do need to be able to feed your family, put a roof over their heads, and have a close knit family unit like that. And I think that's important.
I think that's a really good observation, Hamilton, because it comes down to, you know, Tina's very like knows her own mind, you know, strong willed, the whole deal. And I don't say those things as pejoratives. I say them as positives, the things that attracted me to her. But Tina also expects me to lead. Like if I'm not leading in a certain area for which she expects that has an effect.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that you know, you hear this mentioned sometimes, and I think it's absolutely true. And it goes to the heart of this question: what do you really want? If you really want a man that leads, that's going to include sacrifice. And Tina had to sacrifice a lot because of the first 10 years, 11 years of our marriage, I was gone for roughly half of it over that time.
Yeah. Between
training, between schools, between deployments, between combat deployments. I mean, I was gone a lot. Mm-hmm. And look, I ended up volunteering for more combat deployments than I actually got to go on. I remember one time her looking at me like, "Did you just volunteer to go to Afghanistan?" I'm like, "Yeah, babe, I did, but I don't think they're going to let me." And again, I didn't always do that the best way either, right? Like, I'm not telling, I don't want to give the impression it's okay, guy, just go do what your mission is. And she's just supposed to tag along and keep the home fires burning. But before we were dating, or before we were married or engaged or anything like that, I had decided I was going to join the military. It was very, very important to me from a service perspective, from a proving myself perspective, from a patriotism perspective. Like, add up the reasons. I had a lot, and I was going to do that. And I think it's right. As much as Tina might have appreciated that, oh, he wants to spend more time with me, so he's not going to go, she would have been disappointed. And I think it's an important thing to understand that is that this is not a question. So many times we frame the argument as me or this, or if I was a higher priority, then he would do this. And I want it to be understood. I didn't go off to the military in spite of Tina. I went off the military in part because this was something that I felt like I needed to do both personally and professionally to be worthy of her.
Well,
right?
it wasn't just that. It was also that honor and duty, your commitment to.
Well, but that's the point I'm trying to make is that this is not a either or proposition. And if you get in this habit of believing that, well, if he has to go to this or if he's spending time doing this, and I wish he was here, or I wish he was doing this over here, or I wish he chose a different path. Again, I'm not using this as some sort of absolute or universal statement because there's always exceptions to the rule, but I think it is important to understand that if you do want a guy that leads, well, then there's going to be times where he will have to do stuff that is honor bound, duty bound, whatever it might be. And if you're going to make him choose between those two things, understand that in his mind, he's not choosing between you and this other thing. So you don't have to compete with it in that sense.
Well, and that is one of the reasons why I think it's very important when you first meet people. It's another reason why I think you cannot get physical. Yeah. I mean, just wait on the physical stuff because you need to know their mind. You need to know if you are on the same page intellectually. And you also have to know, look, he's going on this track with his life, and that kind of attracts me to him, right? But you need to do some introspection and go, am I up to this task? Am I going to be able to support him in the way I need to on that path? And if you just know that you're like way too high maintenance for that, and like you're way too needy, you're way too insecure or whatever, you've got some work to do before you can jump in there. And so I am saying that. So some of this is, I'm addressing sort of this issue of women who they will find somebody that they think is that really good guy and then not understand why it's not working out the way they wanted it to and why it's like they're just not connecting right and like he still goes off and does whatever he's going to do. I think part of it is because you have to recognize whether or not you're willing to get on the path with that person that they're on and whether or not it meshes. And if you get physical too fast and you let your heart get way too wound up in it way too fast, then it will be really hard to extricate yourself and you're going to have a tough marriage if you do get married in the future, or it'll be a tough relationship. And so to me, half the battle is recognizing who is not for you early, recognizing this person, he's good looking, he's a great guy, but he's not for me. And I'm not for him. And I
think the other part I want to say on this is that I don't want to put it all in pejoratives. Like if you don't have the strength or if you don't have what it takes or you're too needy, like there's some cases where it just might be that's not the life you want. And that's fair, right? That doesn't necessarily make you a weak person, right?
Yeah, but some women recognize that they need communication a lot. They need reassurance a lot. Well, there's certain men in certain professions where you're not going to get that. It is not possible for him to give that to you. And so if you know you're the type that needs that, then you need to go elsewhere. That's all I'm saying. Either that or
well, and again, it's like be honest with one another, like identify this early on. And keep in mind too, like Tina obviously had to adapt to me being in the military and me deploying, and especially in the units that I eventually ended up in. But by the same token, I also had to understand, I also had to adapt for what the things I needed to do to help facilitate that. So she's making sacrifices for the sort of man and the husband that she wants. I also need to make sacrifices for the wife and the woman I love.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not saying that men don't also have that need for introspection and what they're willing to adjust and all that. I'm just coming from the women's perspective because I so often see these women who are like, if he doesn't treat me like the princess I am and treat me like a queen and do this for me and do that for me and basically jump and, every time I say jump, there are women that have this idea that he should deal with all of her quirks and all of her baggage and all all of her, crazy, but she shouldn't have to deal with anything in return. And my thing I'm trying to say is that recognize yourself, know yourself. You will not know whether or not you're getting what you want until you know yourself a little bit better. And that takes recognizing, are you kind of a hot mess? Like if you are, what work can you do to get better? Because I just think that you've got to prepare yourself for what you want. So it's that whole idea of, how do you attract the man that you want? Well, you've got to do some work to do that. It's not all looks. And the reason I say that is because here's what happens to people when she's beautiful and she puts on this persona and tries to act like she's, going to be super chill, even though she knows in her heart she's not all that chill. And she knows in her heart she's a little bit of a hot mess, but she's going to go ahead and put on this act in order to make him think she's super chill so she can kind of hook him in. And she's going to be gorgeous and the whole deal. And this is the thing is, you don't want to make somebody fall in love with something that isn't really you. You want them to love who you really are. And so you've got to be yourself. You need to present to them your mind, who you really are, and communicate who you really are. Now, if it's off-putting to them that you're so open and direct, then that's a good indicator he's not ready either. And
let's real quick.
Yeah.
Because we're about to, I want to transition into that. So the first one, as far as what do you want? I mean, part of it, again, your whole statement is sometimes honestly, women aren't exactly sure what they want. Again, with men, I think we're stereotyped in men only want one thing. And men, no, that's not true. I'm not saying that thing's not important to us. I'm just saying it's not the only thing. So I do think for women, obviously you've got to look at, what you find attractive. Character is the most important thing. And a lot of times the way character is going to manifest in a man is kind of what they see as their mission in life with respect to not just their profession, but what they see as their role as a husband and a father. And to Tina's point, and this is especially true of women, especially when it gets physical. When it starts to get physical, the chemical reactions that take place during that act affect men and women in similar ways, but also in ways that are different. And women will feel a sense of attachment as a result of that chemically. And so it's one of the reasons why you'll hear in a lot of these podcasts, they talk about pair bonding and stuff like that. And when a woman's had multiple partners, it makes the pair bonding very, very difficult. I would argue it has that effect for both men and women, but it tends to manifest itself more chemically in women. And so the reason why you put the physical off is because those important questions about what do you want him to believe? How do you want him to think and problem solve? How do you want him to address things? How do you want him to communicate? Those are all things that become a lot easier to figure out and discuss and talk about before the physical enters into the component. Now, one of the things that, again, Kat mentioned is, okay, that's great. I appreciate that, but I end up finding men who I think want the same things I do and who say they want the same things I do, but then it becomes apparent very, very quickly in the relationship that they want to go to the physical stuff as soon as possible. And this is the part where I want to transition into part 2, right? Is how do you find that guy? How do you what do you do to attract the sort of person that you actually want? And from a man's perspective, again, if I'm just saying, what are the things that attracted me to Tina that indicated to me, not that just that, oh, this is a pretty girl, but indicated to me that this is someone that's it. That's the one and only for the rest of my life. Because we got married, I was 19 when we got married. And again, for anybody that's wondering, oh, you two must have grown up in very, very traditional households nope.
No, we didn't.
No, both of our parents divorced, remarried. Mine got divorced again. We saw a lot of divorce. There was a lot of, spending time at different houses. And for me, traveling to see dad during the summers and mom to schoolers. So no, we didn't have this effectively, modeled for us in the most perfect, way. That's not to, trash or belittle our parents at all. Tina and I both love our parents, and I love my in-laws and the whole deal.
And they also recognize it wasn't ideal.
Yeah. But the reason why I point that out is that the things that I was attracted to Tina, the things that made me attracted to her far beyond this idea of, oh, that's just someone, I want to get physical with. was again, for me, it was kind of she demonstrated an ability almost from the first time we met, where the first time we talked, we were talking about kind of weighty issues and we were arguing, right? It was not a gentle conversation. And I liked that. I liked the fact that she knew her own mind and she wanted to have a conversation. The other thing that I will say that I respected about Tina right off the bat, and I will say, I think this is catnip for a dude. Right? I'm just going to say this, and Christian, Hamilton, back me up on this if you want.
Boobs. No,
it wasn't
boobs. Okay. Sorry.
Man, that really derailed this conversation.
Just kidding, guys.
No, it was the fact that we would argue, but she didn't expect to win the argument because she was more, passionate. She didn't expect to win the argument because, she was a girl, or she didn't expect to win the argument because she, whatever. There wasn't a sense of entitlement in the way she argued. She expected to win because she thought she had a good argument, but she also recognized that there was actually standards for a discussion. And I can remember early on when someone, like if I made a good point, she would say, oh yeah, that's a good point. And honestly, for a guy who we are desperate to want to be able to connect with and have a relationship with a woman that we can love and that we can provide for and we can protect, right? If you're that traditional guy, for a woman to be able to passionately argue with you, to use good reasoning, good argumentation, not devoid of emotion. Not devoid of emotion, but not dependent upon it.
Not driven by emotion.
Yes. And then to say, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. I was wrong. Or when I was like, oh my gosh, like this is, we can problem solve together. We can figure stuff out together.
Yeah.
And for a guy, that's not just refreshing, it's exciting.
And that's why it's so important to be yourself and to be able to present that side of yourself right away. I feel like if you meet somebody and you're going to meet up for a date or something like that, you should be tackling some questions right then. This idea that you're going to meet them and kind of get to know them a little bit, but you don't want to scare them away with all these tough questions. No, get it done. Don't waste each other's time. Like,
that
honestly,
was my fault. That was
no, go ahead.
Multiple times now that's been my fault. I've just been too afraid to ask like deep questions, and so I'm constantly asking these like superficial questions that ultimately I don't care about, and I know they don't care about, and it just doesn't go anywhere. And I'm sure that for women that there's a similar fear, maybe manifested in a different way, but like there's something to be said about everybody being afraid. And I'm a complete total hypocrite for even bringing this up, because I am absolutely guilty of it at every single level. But there's something to be said about like being afraid to, I don't know, go beyond just the pure superficial discussion about, the weather or something like that with somebody that you're interested in, and asking some of those deep questions for exactly the same reasons that you brought up, that like you're afraid that you're going to scare them away. I mean, one thing that you were bringing this up at the very beginning of this episode, Tina, that like a lot of women don't actually know what they want. And it's like they want the man to kind of guess what they want, even though they don't really know what they want. You know what it is? It's like you're on YouTube and you don't know what you want, but the YouTube algorithm is supposed to tell you what you want.
Yeah.
I have to say, some like gentle advice that I could give to somebody like Kat, and I don't know Kat very well. I know that she sent this request in our circle group that led to this episode, but if I could give any advice, speaking as a man, obviously I can't speak from a woman's perspective, but like if I could give any advice, I think something that guys want is for a woman to decide like what she wants to do with her life, just like I think how women want that from men. And I mean that in a different sense. I mean like not what's your career goals, because one thing that I think women do know, but maybe not enough women know, is that guys don't care about what your career goal is. They don't. It's
we
not
don't mean that mean. We don't mean it's just not a deciding factor for us.
We don't mean that like we're not going to support you in executing those career goals. Like if I find a wife and she has a career goal to do X, I'm going to do everything I possibly can to help her.
It's just not a factor for you.
Yes, but it's not going to be a factor in me determining who I want to spend the rest of my life with. for women, I do think that they do look at what's a career goal with a guy. If a guy's career goal is to sit on the couch all day long watching anime and playing video games, that's not a very productive career goal. And I say this as somebody who loves sitting on a couch and playing video games, but I also do some very productive stuff outside of that.
Ladies.
And so like for women, the advice that I could give is like, figure out what you want. What do you want? And I don't mean that in a career sense. I mean, like, what do you want in terms of family? How many kids do you want? That's a huge question. I have family and friends of mine who divorces happened and long-term relationships blew up because they disagreed on fundamental things like, again, what type of relationship or marriage is this going to be? How many kids are you going to have? Whether or not you're going to order the chicken or steak from Good Ranchers. That was my key. I was trying to tee up the ad there.
Yeah, and that does remind me that if one thing that we can all agree that we all want is quality food from Good Ranchers. Like, we can all agree. I don't care where you are. I don't care what your life goals are there. Chances are, whether you want to be a doctor or an astronaut or an influencer or whatever else it is, you're probably going to need some good steak, right? And so Good Ranchers is the place to go in order to get it. Like, that's just the bottom line. For all the questions that we're going to try to discuss today that are complex and difficult and nuanced, this isn't one of them. You go to goodranchers.com, you put in promo code Nick, you sign up for one of the subscriptions. All of a sudden, steak, pork, poultry, and wild-caught seafood shows up to your door. And just to say thank you for subscribing with them, they're going to give you like a year's worth of free chicken, right? So like every order that comes in with that subscription, they're going to give you free chicken as a way of saying, hey, thanks for choosing us. It's one of the ways that they pour back into the relationship, if you will, with Good Ranchers. So go to goodranchers.com, use promo code Nick, because for the month of January, you sign up for that subscription. Not only are you going to get free shipping, not only are you going to get some money off, you're going to get that free chicken with the order. And again, it is a great deal. Good Ranchers likes to, Ben Spell at Good Ranchers like to say, we've had a lot of people that, you know, they first sign up for the steak and they love the steak, but then they realize how much they actually love the chicken as well. And so he's giving you an opportunity to basically call him out and decide whether or not that's a true statement. So goodranchers.com, use promo code Nick, sign up for a subscription, get a bunch of free stuff to go along with it. I promise you're not going to be disappointed with the quality of some of the best beef, pork, poultry, and wild-caught seafood that you can get. Okay.
What do you got
Great
there,
segue,
Hamilton?
Christian.
Well, I know what I'm cooking for dinner tonight. I've got the beef top sirloin steak. Also got my free 2 pounds of chicken with this order too, so I'm pretty excited to open that, cook that up tonight. I did want to say, though.
Yeah, Hamilton, you need to bring that up here. Next time that you're in the studio, you need to bring the chicken up here so that way I can cook you buffalo chicken mac.
I'll
How
consider
romantic.
it. I'll consider it.
So what was the question?
I wanted to say this. A couple months ago, Patrick Bet-David posted a reel about how his first date with his wife, and he brought this book of like 90 questions that they went through, and they talked about each one. And there are really three things that help me understand whether or not a woman that I meet could be my potential wife. One is how active she is with her faith. 2 is her opinions on sex before marriage and what her comfort with all of that is. And then 3, how uncomfortable she is to have the hard questions asked up front. And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter who I talk to my age that is not involved in the making the argument type of crowd. They're always like, oh, you got to hold those questions for 2, 3, 4 dates in. You got to see if you're comfortable talking to each other. And at the end of the day, I don't want to go on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 dates with you if I don't know whether or not this has the possibility of working out. And so for any single woman listening to this podcast, if you get uncomfortable by those hard questions being asked early, that's a problem. Because I promise you, if I went on a date with you, there would be some type of deep, uncomfortable conversation, hopefully not uncomfortable, but deep conversation happening on that, just to really get to the meat of the situation. I don't think we should be uncomfortable to have those conversations. Like, those are good things. Like, we have very important things to do in life, like build a family, build careers together. Like, this is an opportunity to do something really great.
I think typically
Tina and I figured. Wait a second. Tina and I knew each other actually for quite a while, and we'd had conversations about things before we had ever started dating. And that's going to kind of go into that third category that we're going to talk about here, and that's where do you find these people. But when it comes to how do you attract the sort of person that you're looking for, again, I think part of that is the idea of, okay, again, what do you want? You got to figure that out. Another thing is, how do you attract that? Look, there's, we talk about this all the time. We do like our 90-day challenge where we talk about, okay, like for the next 90 days, what are we all going to work on within our community that's going to allow ourselves to improve ourselves, like spiritually, emotionally, physically, professionally, intellectually, right? Because if you look at everything that you're looking for in another person, that you're looking with respect to what you're going to build as a family, pretty much everything falls into one of those categories, right? The spiritual is important because it's what do you believe? Like what is the foundation of your worldview? And a lot of people, even a lot of people that love the show kind of like poo-poo that as like, well, you don't really need that. Like, okay, if you want to believe that, you can. I don't. I believe it is important. I believe it is absolutely critical to understand what the other person believes about objective truth, objective morality. Why are we all here? What is the purpose of existence, right? And faith provides insight into kind of the rules for how someone navigates those very, very important, ultimately existential questions. And so don't negate that, right? And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people, when we talk about where are the places you find people, again, a lot of times people find each other in church, right? Not always, sometimes it always work out, but that is a common place because there's a shared set of values. And that's really, really important to understand. So when you're asking yourself like, okay, what do I do to attract the sort of person that I want? You're probably, answering some of those fundamental questions for yourself. What do you believe and why? The other thing on that emotional side is about understanding kind of who you are. And, Tina mentioned this before. Some people, they need a lot of connection. They need a lot of interaction. Other people, they want it to have a great deal of value and maybe even intensity, but they also understand that, by virtue of me having to deploy and me having to go places, we couldn't always be with each other all the time, even though we wanted to be. And it's about understanding what are your emotional needs and how can you also develop emotional maturity, right? Which is something, again, as a 19-year-old, private in the 82nd Airborne Division, I had some emotional maturing to do, right? Because you go from like, oh, I'm a, badass, whatever, to, okay, I need to be, I need to be available for my wife. I need to be sensitive, all these. So there's emotional maturity, that there's things that you can work on in order to develop that. And so much of it on the men's side is about, listening and understanding that a lot of times men and women approach problems differently. And so how do I develop the capacity to listen with the intent of understanding? My buddy Nate, that's one of his favorite things. How do you listen with the intent of understanding rather than just the intent of responding? And that's a huge source of emotional maturity and growth for a guy. When it comes to the intellectual, do you have anything to say of value, right? Like is your entire knowledge of anything just pop culture? I will tell you this. Again, one of the things that attracted me to Tina, and it was because she wanted to talk about important issues. Not just, political, spiritual, things that were going on, things that were relevant to the sort of future that we were going to build together. It wasn't an uncomfortable conversation for Tina and I to talk about what our expectations were with respect to how should a husband behave, how should a father behave, how should a wife behave, how should a mother behave, right?
And chances
I don't mean behave. I don't mean behave in the subservient sense. I just mean that when it got to when it became very evident to us that we were serious about one another, having those discussions was fun. It wasn't uncomfortable. And we did go into a great deal of depth. So I appreciated her, the efforts that she had taken to develop herself intellectually as well. And then when it came to professional, I remember we talked about it. She talked about, these are the things that I'm interested in. These are the things that I like. But by the same token, I want to be a mother. I want to be there for my children. And I want to marry a man that wants me to be able to do those things. So here's the part that needs to be understood. That is a professional goal. That's not, I'm not going to be professional because I'm going to do this. No, actually treating, raising children and managing a home is a professional aspiration, not just, not just emotional one, or not just like, family. It is professional in the sense when you look at it as, no, these are tasks that I'm going to perform that I am going to take pride in.
Yeah, and women are made to feel kind of ashamed of that desire now. And there's a lot of women where it's almost like their wiring has been mixed up. There's certain women that'll say, well, I'm just not the nurturing type, blah, 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 whatever. I would say that's probably a lot more due to the influences of society and society basically telling you it's not okay to want to do these other things, and that everything's about you and being super fulfilled in and of yourself before anything else. And the only thing that can really fulfill you is a high-powered job, some kind of career. And it's interesting because I remember wrestling with that in myself. I felt really, really sort of insecure for a long time about the fact that I chose to be a mom at home with my kids, homeschooling my kids. And when people would say, what do you do? I always kind of felt caught. Like, and then I had this lady come up to me one time. I was running for office actually. And I had dreaded people asking me, what do you do for work? Or, where did you go to school or whatever? And I dreaded that. And someone asked me, and I said, well, I married my husband pretty much right out of high school. And my goal was to be a wife and a mother. And that's what I wanted. And this woman was in the crowd and came up to me afterwards, and she said, you had this look like you might be a little bit embarrassed that was your life choice. And I wasn't embarrassed. It's just I was so tired of people looking at me and acting like I did something inferior, like what I chose was inferior. And this lady goes, let me tell you, I have 3 PhDs. She goes, you need to confidently explain why you chose the path you did. And it's okay that you chose the path you did. And you should never feel ashamed of that. And it felt good to have somebody that did all this stuff, outside of being a wife and a mother, tell me that my path was legitimate. And so I think a lot of women really struggle with admitting that that's what they want, because they have been told and told and told that is not what you're supposed to want. You're supposed to want more than that. And a man won't want you unless you bring something to the table. And I actually do see men on reels and shorts and, various podcasts who are like, what does she bring to the table? Is she going to be able to help my finances? So there are men out there that aren't down with the whole traditional wife situation. Here's the deal. You need to recognize that. You need to know it early. And that's one of the reasons why you need to be honest about what you want. Do you want to be a traditional wife, or do you have a career path that you do love to do? And is it going to be something that, I want to work having a family around this career path too, and have both, what it is you need to know right out the gate whether this person is right for you or not. And that is the very first thing. And usually I see men being more uncomfortable with those direct questions right away. Men tend to be more uncomfortable with that than women. Women are like, let's get down to brass tacks here. I want to know what you think about this, what you think about that. And, I think that knowing what you really want is a hard thing for women. I think it's hard for men too, because men have also been told that it's not okay to want a wife that stays home. It's not okay to want a wife that takes care of the kids and have that be her main responsibility, because men are told that, no, you putting a woman in that position is wrong and bad, and you're, toxically masculine, whatever, toxic masculinity.
Men are told to not even ask women out anymore.
Right.
Like they're utterly terrified to even talk to women increasingly because of things like Me Too and modern third, increasingly fourth wave feminism. And so But to gently push back to something that you said just a minute ago, Tina, when you were like, there's some shows out there that, the men are like, well, what do you bring to the table? It's not, again, it's not in a career sense that question is being asked. That question is being asked in the context of the women across the table on these shows are saying things like, I demand a guy that, is jacked, 6 foot tall, makes six figures. Yeah. And then the guy says, okay, great. So what are you bringing to the relationship? And it doesn't have to be a career.
No, I am specifically talking about money. I have seen guys say you need to bring money to the table.
But as a guy, when I see that question, especially at who that's directed to, that question is more, if you're making these impossible demands, I mean, there's even things like the female delusion calculator, right? Which is like how many guys under the age of 30 or 35 meet all of these different requirements. And then they'll ask the women on these shows and they'll be like, oh, I don't know, 10, 20%. And then it'll be like 0.02% of the population. And so like this pushback that you're seeing is, I think, in part because of these like really delusional standards, but it's also because I think that, again, there's a lot of men that have been kind of like indoctrinated, so to speak, into, similar to what you said, not asking for these things or not looking for these things or feeling bad for looking for these things. And so now you're seeing this pushback where men are getting a little bit more aggressive and saying, okay, if you're going to demand all this stuff from me, then I'm going to demand all of these things from you. And
yeah.
Well, let's face it.
These people just aren't meant to be around each other. They aren't good for each other. They should just cross each other off the list and move on.
Well, and that's again. So when you look at the first thing that we talked about is what do you want? Well, clearly, if that's what you want and it doesn't make sense, well, then move on. Yeah. Right. And when we look at like, some of these podcasts and whatnot, I mean, there's actually some interesting conversations going on. And a lot of it is about pointing out the kind of like the double standards of the delusions associated with these expectations. But again, what Kat, the person that asked us to talk about this, was saying, yeah, but I'm not that woman. Yeah. I'm not any of those girls. And I'm tired of being compared to them. I'm tired of being treated as if, well, that's all there is. So why even bother? She goes, when I'm out here like desperately looking, and then I will find someone that theoretically, says the right things about what they want and tradition and values and stuff like that. And then almost ultimately demonstrates that that's not what they want. And that's where I want to lead into this third point. All right. But I need to complete something with the other, because we talked about those 5 things, right? There's the spiritual, the emotional, the intellectual, the professional, and the physical. And the question is that how do you attract the sort of once you've decided what you want, or once you got a pretty good idea of what you want, how do you attract that? And that last category was the physical. And what I'll say on that is that, again, another thing that comes out of these shows, where that gets men very frustrated is, okay, well, so apparently all the women in the world want 0.02% of the men. And it's been demonstrated over and over again that in a lot of situations, especially as society has become more promiscuous, that, 80% of the women are sleeping with 20% of the men. And then when they figure out that man's never going to marry him, then all of a sudden they start looking to their, second, third, and fourth tier. And those guys are like, screw you. I'm like, I'm not your left. I'm not, I'm not doing this. I'm not your backup guy. And so the question is because men have become so frustrated with what they feel are unrealistic expectations for how men are supposed to look. The other thing I think men need to realize is that women obviously have dealt with what they believe to be, and I think reasonably so, a lot of unrealistic expectations for how women are supposed to look. And this is something that I want to tell men out there. When it comes to the physical, I think it's perfectly appropriate to obviously, have things that you're attracted to as a man. It's perfectly appropriate for women to have things they're attracted to as a woman. And there are always things that there's some things that we're born with that just are what they are. And I'm not someone that believes that people should go out there and start injecting themselves with a bunch of stuff to try to drastically alter the way they look and things like that. I'm not judging people that, whatever, make your own decisions. But it is a good sign, right? It is a good sign when people try to stay at least like in good physical condition. That's something that you can affect. It doesn't matter, what other hand life has dealt you with respect to height or hair color or eye color or whatever else, going, working out, stuff like that. That's always a good thing that you can develop that will make you feel better, that is good for your health. And again, I think people should maintain reasonable expectations with respect to that, but that is something that you can affect. Now I want to put this out for men for a second, because advertising in general, but specifically porn. There's a lot of women out there that they want to be the traditional woman. They're look, they do the right things. They stay in good physical shape. They eat right, the whole deal, right? Like all of those reasonable, healthy things, not ridiculous standards, reasonable, healthy things. And they feel like they've got to compete with whatever the airbrushed Instagram version is of the woman showing up on these podcasts, or they've got to compete with whatever, like, very, very inappropriate and ultimately perverse fantasies have been created through pornography. And so the thing that I would tell both men and women on the physical side, because porn also affects women, it's not just something that affects men. First of all, stay away from that. Cut that out of your life, because it is nothing but toxic. I will. There's even some people that I see that they give some advice on relationships every once in a while a lot of good advice. But whenever the moment they say, well, porn can actually be beneficial. Nope. The moment I hear those words, I'm like, nope. There's something fundamentally wrong with the way that they're analyzing and understanding this situation. If there's one thing I could tell both sides, it is at all times bad for both of you, period, the end. There is no beneficial component to it, because it will ultimately it will adversely affect the way that people see each other. It is fake. It is not real. And ultimately what you want in your relationship is something real. And I don't just mean that for the character component or the intellectual component, or the emotional or spiritual. You want real on the physical side is too. And if you really want to be able to have someone that you are physically attracted to, and you want to work to be physically attracted to them, with the way that you present yourself, right? With, again, like basic, like for guys, right? Be clean, right? Be clean, dude, right? And show up and demonstrate to her that your appearance for her is important to you. Right? You want her to be proud in the way that you carry yourself and things like that. And women, same thing for guys, right? All of that's good. But if you really want that part to be everything it can be as well, you have to cut out these other influences that are constantly invading the visual, the mental, and everything else. And not creating, I hate it when we use that term like lower your expectations or manage your expectations. No. It's not about lowering your expectations. I didn't lower my expectations for my wife. I kept them incredibly high, but I also tried to keep them in line with the things that matter, that truly matter for a marriage and a relationship that is not just strong in all those other categories, but also passionate. Right. And if you want to have that, then there are things that you have to do and that you have to prepare yourself for and that you have to like guard against in order to genuinely have that. So I wanted it in that point on the physical, and I want to move into this next category because I think we got 3 more categories to go, right? Where do you find them? Red flags and deal breakers. And does this really work in today's environment? So that this next one, where do you find them? I think this is one of the most important. And Christian said something earlier that I do want women to understand, because this is something that as I've listened to people talk about dating today, that has become very, very prevalent. And that's this idea that guys aren't sure what they're supposed to say or what they're supposed to do or when they're supposed to approach or anything like that. Not simply because they will get rejected, but because it could be career ending, right? And I'm not talking, obviously men should be appropriate in the workplace and appropriate in public spaces and things of that nature. But if you look at the areas where a lot of people tend to met the person they were going to marry, college, workplace, okay, well, now the workplace, that is an incredibly dangerous thing. You could be doing something that you find that you think is perfectly innocent, like, hey, would you like to go out and get a drink sometime? Well, now all of a sudden you've created a hostile work environment, even though if Doug would have done it, it would have been perfectly fine because she likes Doug. The bottom line is the moment a guy feels that is an unsafe environment to do that, they're not going to. And if they're not going to be able to actually, potentially form a romantic relationship in an environment where there's already some sort of shared, component or culture or interest, right? Then you wipe out an entire category. Now, I'm not talking about bosses taking advantage of subordinates, whether that's men or women. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying that understand something. Same thing with education. You go to a university now, and chances are, if you're a single woman in a university, the idea that you are probably going to fall on a side of the political and ideological spectrum that is incredibly hostile toward men is very high. Like all the stats point to this. That's not to say every woman in college believes that. But again, when you're a guy operating in an environment where asking the wrong question or saying the wrong thing to the wrong woman can potentially get you in a ton of trouble, they're going to start to shut down. They're not going to go out there and actually provide the sort of, they're not going to ask you out, even when you want them to, if the consequences for asking them out in that environment are potentially catastrophic. And so this is the part where it becomes very, very important for, if you are the traditional man, the traditional woman, looking for that traditional other, right? Where do you actually go to find these places? Because a lot of the places you used to be able to go to are no longer safe. Christian, Hamilton, as young guys in this environment, is that a fair assessment for how you look at that with respect to like either college or the workplace?
I think that that's a fair assessment. I think that a lot of the reason why I probably have not asked more girls out on dates is because I understand that the likelihood that I am going to align with this individual on faith, things of that nature, is relatively low. But the likelihood of those things aligning also increases based off of where I am at. As we've talked about a couple times now, the Homesteaders of America conference was a great opportunity to meet a future wife. I was not successful this past year in October. Things may change. Things may change for this coming October. But what I can say is that my future wife might be able to find me in 2024, or I find her in a church small group. That's one location. At the gym, it's another location. And just hanging around town with friends and different things like that at trivia nights and different things. One of my goals for 2024 is to physically put myself in more locations where I could meet my future spouse. Mm-hmm. And because I don't like online dating, I don't like dating apps. You talked about being fake, Nick. I can't help but feel like dating apps are this persona that you would like to be seen as, and people are catering their profiles to meet the expectation that they have for themselves, or the vision that they have for themselves. And I've always found that to be somewhat dishonest. But that's a goal for me in 2024. So yeah, I think that those are my thoughts on that.
Well, nobody's going to find me unless they break down my door and drag me out of my house. So
oh my gosh. You're going to lose all complaining privileges here at some point, Christian, just by virtue of not.
I've got a lot going on in my life right now. Adding a relationship to it is like we've got some new projects coming up, and this is a big year.
But Christian, do you have, when it really comes down to it, do you actually have anything going on in life if you aren't doing it with your future spouse? Like, I'm to the point in my life where I don't feel I've got one of the best careers I could have ever asked for. I'm working with some of the best people I could have ever asked for, making good money. But I don't feel like I have jack squat until I am doing it in service to my future spouse, my future family, and what we will build together. Like, I haven't told everybody publicly on the podcast yet, and I was waiting for more of an official time, but I've made a location change here recently from Virginia to North Carolina because I'm so focused on building my family and finding the woman that I'm going to do it with. I just didn't feel like the possibility was very high in Virginia, and I want to build my future family around my family where they're at. But do you really have anything going on if it isn't with the woman you could spend the rest of your life with and the family that you could be building with her?
I mean, that's slightly outside the focus of the episode, but to give a short answer, yes. I don't know what to say. Like, I mean, I'm not actively searching for somebody. And I previously was, and maybe I will again in the future, but I'm not actively searching for somebody. I've got a fantastic career as well that's finally actually taken off, and there's more stuff coming. So, I mean, I'm professionally, I'm quite happy with where I'm at right now, and I'm ecstatic with where I know things are going. But
well,
I mean, here it goes back to the whole like what do you want? the best piece of advice that I could give somebody like Kat is figure out what you want. And I know that it might be difficult. Tina says that women don't really know what they want. Figure out what you want. That is my best piece of advice. Figure out what type of woman you want to become. Figure out what type of wife you want to be. And presumably she is looking for a husband, right? So figure out what type of wife you want to be. Figure out what your plans are for your family. Figure out what that relationship looks like. And then you will be able to know, once you have those things nailed down, where you need to go in order to find the type of husband that is right for you. That's the best advice that I can give. And don't force it either. If it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. There's 8 billion people in this world, 4 billion men. You don't have to settle. And I don't mean that in the modern feminist sense that you're seeing on places like whatever podcast where the women are, again, have these outrageous expectations and they're like, well, I don't want to settle. I don't mean it in that sense. What I mean it in the sense is you don't have to pick a guy that doesn't share your values and your vision and your worldview and your plans for your family and your career. It just because you're panicking. And I know that the whole biological clock thing is different for men and women.
It's a
man
real
can
thing
get
for
married
women.
in his 40s and have kids.
Yeah.
Right. And so I understand that there's, you're on the clock in a way that for men, you just aren't. And I also understand that there's a lot more commitment in some ways for a woman when it comes to relationship. I don't mean emotionally, I mean physically, in the sense that a man can have, ask Genghis Khan how many children he can have, right? Yeah. A woman can only have a fixed number of kids because it takes 9 months to make one. And so there's all these things that's called like the Bateman principle. It's the reason why women are literally a limiting resource within a civilization. There's other limiting resources like the amount of food you can grow. Well, the reproductive capacity of your population is also a limiting resource. And this is also why in almost all societies and also all species, almost universally, the male courts the female because the female is the limiting resource. Now, the problem from the female's perspective is, well, the guy's supposed to come to you, but if you haven't found one that, again, shares those visions and has that same, life plan that you have, well, then what, are you just supposed to sit around and wait for Prince Charming to come along as you let the years pass by? I understand the fear. But you're not going to fix that problem until you sort out, you answer those questions. You have got to answer those questions first.
Well, but here's the deal. Like, I think, again, reading through I think she really has in many respects. And Christian, I've got if for some reason this doesn't all work out, you really should write romantic Hallmark cards, like for women, like, you're the sexiest limiting resource. That's
just how I speak. If you
let, I get it.
The other day, this was like yesterday. It was over yesterday, the day before. The other day, I was looking at like the podcast numbers, right? Because I just spaz out about that type of stuff. I'm a geek when it comes to stuff like that. And I was looking at this number and I see like the number of audio downloads that we get, not counting YouTube or anything like that. And I'm like, whoa, that's a large number. And then it dawned on me and I'm like, holy cow. That means that many people are listening to me every single episode. And then that like instilled a sense of like existential fear in myself because I'm like,
it's intimidating.
Oh my God, it's intimidating because I've told people this before. When Nick and I are talking on the podcast, I usually just treat it like Nick and I are just talking.
Yeah.
And then I have to remember, oh no, there's like tens of thousands of people it's not just a conversation between Nick and I or Tina and I or the three of us or the four of us with Hamilton. No. We're in a room and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people listening. So I understand that some of the stuff that I said about like limiting resources and stuff like that might either be awkward or maybe even offensive, but I don't mean it in an offensive way.
Yeah.
I understand that it's awkward, but it's just the way that I process information.
Well, that's fair.
Can I chime in here? Go ahead, Hamilton.
I have a quick question. Christian, I'm sorry. I was not trying to be a butthole. That was not my intention. But
he doesn't even have to try, Christian.
Okay,
we need to edit that.
I have a question though, Tina. So we are having this conversation about figure out what you want, and I think Christian was right when he said that. But I think there are a lot of people who are in the situation of the only thing that they want is to not be alone.
Yeah.
And they don't know beyond that. And,
well, you don't know what
Tina,
you don't know, right? Mm-hmm.
Right. You don't know what you don't know. And I think it's good for us to understand that it may require some research to figure out what we want. But Tina, what would your recommendation for someone who is in that situation? What should their next steps be to trying to identify what it is that they do want beyond not wanting to just be alone?
Well, I mean, not wanting to just be alone is a pretty good motivator, of course. But at that point, that's when you need to go, okay, well, why don't I want to be alone? What is it that I'm looking for? And it's not just about not being alone, because you could not be alone with friends. You could have a roommate. There's a lot of different not being alone scenarios. You could go move in with your parents and not be alone, right? What you really want, though, I think, is a deep and meaningful connection with somebody who is yours and you're theirs. And that idea that you are going to have something meaningful for the long term, and you're going to, from this point on, build a life together. So it's not just, I don't want to be alone. It's the idea of, are you ready to build a life together? It's not, I'm going here, he's going here, does this line up? It's, what am I willing to do to make adjustments to build this life together? And I think that's really what I think that deep desire is to have someone who loves, really truly loves you and is excited to see you when you come home, and, is there to, kind of pour out affection and love on you when you're having a bad day. Somebody that you get to look forward to when things aren't great, and you've got somebody to hold on to, though, and you can do it together. And I think there's a lot of reasons not to want to be alone, but the point is, why does it have to be a romantic relationship? Why do you want the husband-wife relationship? And I think it's because we really are meant to pair up and build something together and build families together and a legacy together. And it's a deep and meaningful process, and people really don't put very much thought into it nowadays. They put a lot more thought and energy into the wedding day than they do into the rest of the marriage. And if people spent half the time thinking about how they're going to be an amazing spouse rather than how they're going to plan an amazing wedding, I think we'd have a much lower divorce rate. So, all that to say, it's fine if you're comfortable being alone, that's fine. I'm not saying that you have to go out and find somebody, but while you're waiting, it's a good idea to look at yourself and go, am I all of the things I want? So I want this in a man. Am I that? Am I that? So if I want somebody who is caring and understanding and listens and engages in conversation, well, do I do that for others? Have I done the practice to ask questions of others and actually really try to dig into their mind? Because I want someone to dig into my mind, right? So it's this idea of start putting into practice in all of your relationships the good, healthy things that you want to come out of your ultimate marriage relationship, And that kind of, I was telling a friend of mine, it's like we all have our toolbox packed for us by our parents. And sometimes our parents didn't give us the right tools for the right situation. And it's up to us then to try to figure out what the right tool is, learn how to use it, and add it to our toolbox, right? And that could be communication. That could be in how we interact with other people, how we work, how we live our lives, and how we keep our home. So there are all these different areas where we could really, while we're waiting, we could be doing better. We could be getting ourselves ready and building new habits and building new ways of doing things that maybe weren't taught to us by our parents, but that we are going to implement moving forward so that we can be better and be better prepared as parents and as spouses and even just as sons and daughters. You can make all of your relationships better by doing that. And so that's the idea to me, is the how to attract who you want. You gotta be, you gotta be what they want also. And then I would say also this idea of where you find them. Alex, the real Alex. Oh gosh, what's her last name? I can't remember.
Is it Cooper?
Clark.
No, Clark.
Real Alex
Yeah.
Clark, yeah.
She was talking about how, men always say they don't want women that dress all skanky and all this stuff, right? But she shows this outfit of what she wore to a club with her friends, and it was like super conservative, high neck, long pants, not close.
But it was classy.
It was classy, not super close fitting. And she goes, and you know what? People made fun of me for that. Here's the deal, you guys. And she had a good point, but I've got a counterpoint, okay? You went into an environment where it's expected, where everyone dresses like a stripper, and you did not do that. You got made fun of. Well, those aren't the men you want anyway. Those are not the men you want. That's not the correct pool to find who you want. So if you're going to the club and the alcohol is flowing and everybody's grinding up on each other, dancing on the dance floor, really? You think you're going to find the one there? Really? No, I don't care how conservatively you dress and do all of this. You're still not going to attract the right guy there, no matter what. And you've got to put yourself into the pools. So there's a lot of fish in the sea, right? But there's also a lot of pools that bring them down into smaller portions. You need to go to the pool that is most likely to have people of like-mindedness there. And if you don't,
that's the part I want to emphasize before we go into this next category of like red flags and deal breakers, right? Because there's a difference between red flags and deal breakers. But yeah, when we talk about where do you go to find, this is the part that I kind of started this off with, is that some of the traditional places that you used to go, school and work, to find, or that you would naturally find somebody, because if you were in school together, you were in natural proximity and you were discussing things like ideas or whatever it was. And then if you were on work, there was at least something that was a common thing between the two of you. And so these were common places that people met, and they're largely off limits in many respects now. Because of the way that the culture treats them. The thing that I want to emphasize is that, and I hear this a lot from people, and it's kind of sad when they're like, well, I used to think that I'd meet my spouse at church, but it's just as bad there as it ever. Okay, but here's what I will say. I don't want to pretend that it's the exact same environment that when Tina and I met each other and ended up getting married, but I do want to say that the principle remains the same. It may be more difficult to execute the principle. It may be that the areas that you would find someone are reduced or diminished, or that there's other potential problems with them. I understand all of that, but the principle remains the same. Like the principle is effectively unchanging. And that is, before you look at maybe the physical or the other things that are going to attract you to someone, you have to first put yourself into those areas where you have a higher degree of probability of finding somebody with similar worldview and values. Right? Because you're going to find the other things that you like, but if that's the most important, like the most important is worldview and values, and I would argue that is the most important thing, then you have to go to those areas where there's a high degree of probability that you will find people that share those values, and then you pick from that pool. Right? That's your pool. That's your environment. It isn't 4 billion people. It isn't 8 billion people. That's your pool.
Yeah. Well, these guys want to know where to go. So you find those areas. Now, again, for a lot of people, I'm still going to say church is still going to be a primary environment, place of worship, etc. But again, not all churches are the same, right? Like if you're going to a church where the average age in the church is 65, chances are that's not a good deal for you, right? If you're going to a church that says they're a church, but then espouses a bunch of things which are like openly heretical, then that's not a good deal for you. So it is about finding that environment where your values are genuinely shared, but it also provides you an opportunity to be able to find people that could potentially be someone you'd want to marry. Another area where you see that is, Hamilton offered some things with, going to the gym or whatnot. Now, again, a gym is you're going to find maybe similar interests, but not necessarily similar values. And so what I would say is that, again, you're make sure that you're thinking about this logically and reasonably. That if these are my most important criteria, then where do I go? Again, I think church is an important one. There's other things that are shared common interests
that also, are more likely to produce. So even within a church or maybe a religious style organization, it may be sports related, it may be hiking related, it may be something else, but like common interest associated with common values is very important. There's a reason why, again, I have said so much, and people are probably, maybe they're tired of me talking about it. The Homesteaders Conference is something that I loved, obviously not from the perspective of finding a spouse. I've already done that. But I found it rejuvenating because I was around people where there was common interest and common values. And it was a very, very encouraging atmosphere and environment. So again, if I was, going back and, I would imagine to meet someone like a Tina at an environment like that because of the shared values and shared interests. And so that's what I would encourage people to do. Look for the sort of like activities, events, clubs, organizations, whatever it is, where you're going to have a high degree of probability of finding common values and common interests. Because what you're going to find out is that, you're not going to walk up to a woman that you just met and say, "Oh, you look kind of pretty, and I noticed you're at the Homesteaders Conference. Let me ask you about your concepts of marriage." No, you're not going to do that. That's weird and awkward. Don't do that. But if you're already in an environment, right, where you're starting to notice like, oh, we're all here, we're all focused on this particular thing. Oh, I've talked to, hey, this other person and I are talking. We seem to have common interests, common values. Okay, now we're going to, go on that first date or whatever it is, or we're going to go on that first outing that is a little bit more, intimate than the typical setting that we found ourselves in. And a lot of some of those primary questions have been kind of answered just by virtue of where we're at. And now when we do ask those questions in order to confirm, it's not as awkward. It's, it's something that we're both interested in. So that's what I want to get to. Again, find those environments, common interests, common values. That's probably where you're going to find somebody that meets the rest of the criteria that you're looking for a potential spouse. And that takes me into that next point, which is red flags and deal breakers. And this is the part where I want to make something very, very clear. There's a lot of things that can potentially be red flags because none of us are perfect, right? And the more you go through life, the more chances you've had to screw things up. And what I want to make very, very clear here, because sometimes I think people get maybe a little depressed when we talk about certain things that, hey, these are standards, these are things, these are ideals to search for. And people are maybe thinking to themselves, well, I've already screwed up then, right? And I want to make something very, very clear. There's ample opportunities to screw up the longer you live. And I can certainly point to a long list of things that I've screwed up on, that I didn't do well, that I wish I could go back and change. And that's one of the things you end up doing as a parent, is helping your own kids navigate around the potholes that you ran directly into. So I want people to understand that, look, you might find somebody that, hey, you've made mistakes and they've made mistakes. The real question is, where are you now and what did you learn from them? Have they been identified as mistakes? Or do people have this flippant idea, well, that was just me in my younger 20s, or that was just me in college? No. There's a big difference between someone that said, you know what, this happened in college, and I wish I hadn't done that, and this is what I've learned from it, and this is what I want now, and this is why I know what I want now. And I wish I could take that back. I can't, but I did learn from it, and I don't make excuses for it. I learned from it. That is someone that, look, that's someone that has learned from maybe a difficult decision or a difficult experience or whatever else it is. And so when we talk about red flags, obviously if somebody has, made mistakes in their life, it could be anything. Maybe it was financial, maybe it was personal and physical, maybe it was professional. The real question that you need to ask yourself when they're doing it is, what did they learn from it? Because if they have shared values with you and they have shared interests with you, but this is something that, hey, they're owning up to, and that you have stuff that you may have to own up to. Again, having grace for one another is really important. And so I want people to understand that when we talk about the ideals, it's not because I believe, I'm certainly not a perfect representation of all the ideals, but that's the beautiful thing about ideals. They don't change when we screw up. And that is what makes them worth aspiring to. Because even in the aspiration to them and the striving for them, we are made better through that process. And so that's what I would say. Yes, if certain things come up, it may be a red flag, but that just might mean that there's questions to ask. That might just mean that there's a little bit more digging to do. Other red flags, and let me distinguish between these two. There's red flags where it's like, okay, there's some baggage here, but the person understands that it's baggage. The person understands that this wasn't ideal and they've learned from it and moved on. The other red flags are the sort of things where there's baggage and people don't associate it as baggage, or there's personality traits, or there's habits that's been developed, or there's things that they're struggling with that you're going to need to ask yourself, is this something that can be overcome, or is this something that moves into the category of deal breaker? And this is why I want to start right off with, again, addressing this kind of back to Kat, because one of her biggest things, and you can tell, like, it's very frustrating for her. It's like, I want to be that traditional wife, and I want a traditional husband. And I find a guy, and I think we share the same values, and I think we share similar interests. And then it becomes very, very obvious that they want to move towards something physical in a way that I believe is inappropriate. I would tell you right now, I believe any guy that is pressuring you to move physically, that is not just a red flag. That's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
That is a deal breaker, because if the guy is not willing to commit to you before opening up that other side of the physical, I don't give a dang what society or culture says about it. They're wrong. Because that physical is so important to the relationship that you're going to have in the future, right? If a guy is pressuring a girl to get physical like that, before they're willing to marry you, not just get engaged, marry you, that's a deal breaker. And I know that probably sounds extreme in this modern day and age, but back to, Tina's point earlier, Christian's point, and several other points we've made, when it comes to actually building a life with someone, because that's what marriage is. It's building a life together. It's not, I have dreams and she has dreams and we'll see how it figures out. No. When we got married, we had dreams. And so I think it is just so incredibly important. Somebody might have a past, and that past might be something that you guys can set down and forgive and move on for and whatnot. But if someone is saying, yeah, that was my past, and you're still seeing that they haven't really moved away from that, and they're pressuring you to do those things, I think that's a deal breaker. And I'll open it up to, what Tina thinks of that, but that's just my honest opinion.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna mention some things on red flags, because I kind of want to do this in a way where it's you see married relationships that went badly and ended, right? And I kind of want to go backward from there and go, but were there red flags before those people ever got married? And I've never seen a situation where there were not red flags. There were situations where the person should have run and they didn't. And why is that? And so I think if we start getting ourselves used to, or people start getting themselves used to recognizing traits early that are going to be detrimental later on. I mentioned to Nick when we were discussing this topic that, sometimes, women have this fear that, you attract a man by, being beautiful, right? And then beauty fades. And down the road, there are things that happen to your body that make it less attractive. There are things that can happen. You could have breast cancer and get a double mastectomy, or whatever. You have to go through chemo and your hair falls out. There's a lot of different ways that a beautiful woman could lose that outward beauty over time. And if the only thing he was really very attracted to in you was the looks, that's when you end up with the guy that maybe isn't going to be very constant when all of that happens. Like, we've known situations where, these type of things have happened to the woman and the man has left. And this idea that we couldn't really recognize that early on, I beg to differ. I think you can know that a little bit early on. And the way I think you do that is, when you first meet the person, first get to know the person, are they super focused on how pretty you are? Are they really focused on wanting to show you off to their friends or whatever? And they're so focused on, I don't know, how attracted they are to you. But maybe that also can be identified with how quickly they want to get physical as well. But on the other side of it, when you're having conversations with the person, because to me, you've got to be intellectually connected. They've got to be in love with your mind. And if you don't give them a chance to do that and you don't recognize that they really aren't that into your mind, then you're setting it up to later have someone who may not be very constant, who may not be that good guy that stands by you, that is committed and loyal. And if you are in conversations with the person and they don't seem all that interested in the deeper things that you're talking about, and they may let you talk, but they don't actually ask questions to probe deeper. And when they talk about things, it's kind of maybe superficial, and then the other thing also to get into is find out what their family life is like. If it takes them a long time to bring you to meet their family, that's a red flag. Okay. And it's not to say that Tina, it wouldn't be, it's not to say that it couldn't be resolved, but it should put up some feelers like, hey, why isn't he wanting me to meet the family? And,
well, wait a second, Tina. Tina, can we like bring this back a little bit? Because I actually think this is a really, really good point that I want to focus in on. I don't want it to be just kind of a part of a rolling conversation, because this introduction to the family, people we have this idea in modern society that introduction to the family is like, oh wow, it's serious now. And it's like, well, wait a second, why didn't that happen a whole lot earlier? And the reason why, there's multiple reasons why introduction of the family fairly early on in the relationship is pretty important. Now, people are going to come up with 1,000 excuses for why it can't happen. My family's crazy, or they live on the other side of the country, or whatever it is. We're not talking necessarily about this idea where you're all sitting down at the dinner table together, although that is ideal. But we are talking about discussion of one's family and being able to see the family dynamic one came from, not because you're going to write them off if it wasn't, ideal, but because what that family dynamic, that other person that you're going to build a family with, that family dynamic played into their expectations, their idea of what family looks like, their idea of what. One of the reasons why we emphasize so much that the first thing your kids are learning about marriage is watching mom and dad and how they interact. And so understanding that family dynamic, not to write them off if it's not ideal, but to just understand the potential red flags that might present as a result, is very important.
Yeah, it definitely it helps you identify where your challenges might lie. It doesn't mean it's something that it's not like we're not in the deal breaker mode yet. Yeah. We're just, this area here deserves a little bit more examination. So if the family dynamic's not very good, probing that and finding out what's at the heart of this, like, do these people have a hard time communicating? Do these people lock everything down and then have huge blowouts? Do they treat each other well? Do they say things they don't mean? Do they say hurtful things to one another and then wish they hadn't? There's a lot of things like that you can observe and you can find out how these things happened and how things went down. And that'll give you a really good idea as to how you're going to be treated. And go ahead.
I think something to consider too, when you notice a problem in someone else's family, the question is, has this person that you're dating also noticed that this is a problem? And if they have noticed that it is a problem, do they have their own plan to not repeat that problem?
Yes.
And if they have a plan to not repeat it, well, that sounds like a green flag to me,
Yeah.
Oh, Hamilton, that's an excellent point. Like, because again, keep in mind, when Tina and I started dating, my parents had been divorced, remarried, and then my mom had been divorced again, and the whole deal, right? So there was stuff, right? Her parents had been divorced and remarried. And so when we sat down to talk about this, one of the things that we discussed is what did we see as a result of, how that affected family, and again, please understand something. I have a wonderful relationship with my mother. I have a wonderful relationship with my father. I love all my brothers and sisters, and I love Tina's folks. Like I love Tina's in-laws, like her biological dad and stepmom, her biological mom and stepdad. I loved and respected all of them. So none of this should be interpreted as, oh, we're just bashing on our parents. That's not it. But Tina and I both came from situations where, because we knew that, and our parents would all admit this, not ideal situations. I wanted to know how she interpreted that. She wanted to know how I interpreted it. We both wanted to know why we thought various things happened and how would we avoid the pitfalls that our parents fell into. And so, far from being a concern ultimately about how our own marriage would turn out, we turned something that initially would have started off like, this is a red flag, this is a concern. We discussed it, and what we found out was that our experience had equipped us, in part because our parents were honest about things that they did wrong and what they should have done differently. We were now equipped to identify problems and then to set up mitigating factors to make sure that these things didn't happen to us.
Right. One of the questions that we asked each other right away, and first I will say, I had a boyfriend before Nick, and I had asked him the same question. I had asked this boyfriend, is marriage forever? Like, if you get married, is it forever? Is divorce an option? And he goes, well, I think if it just doesn't work out and like people aren't happy, you shouldn't stay together. And that told me everything I needed to know, because marriage gets hard, you guys. Relationships are hard. Friendships get hard. Mother-daughter relationships get hard. Every relationship you have has moments where you're a little mad at the person or things are a little rough at the moment, right? Every single relationship, and your marriage relationship is no different. You are going to have moments where you are just so annoyed with each other or frustrated with each other. You can't get on the same page or whatever. And if the minute it gets hard, you check out and divorce is on the table, well, I mean, I'm glad I knew that young and broke up with the guy. Okay. I asked the same question of Nick. We both came from families of divorce. This guy that I had dated before, his parents were still together. He had never experienced what it was like to be a kid of divorce. With Nick and I, we were both kids of divorce. And when I asked Nick, is marriage forever? Like, when you get married, is it going to be forever? And is divorce an option? He immediately said, no, it's not an option. It's forever. And I said, that's what I believe too. Like, I don't think there's any reason to get married if you think divorce is ever going to be an option. Either one of you. If one of you thinks, yeah, it's not an option, and the other one's like, well, and then they have to be brought around to the idea of it. Nope, red flag right there, because they're not on the same page with you. Even if you manage to get them to come around and say they're on the same page now, their initial response was not that. It's not in their heart. And so that's kind of all that to say, those are some of the questions you can ask, and they're hard questions. They're tough questions. Oh, I mean, they're really hard questions, like that I would tell any girl to ask the young man that is taking her out. Don't ask the question don't lead the questions too much to where they give the answer they're pretty sure you want to hear. Yeah. So instead of
don't let them game the questions.
Yeah. Instead of saying, do you look at porn? Say something like, how often do you look at porn? And that way you're giving them an out to assume they might look at some. And maybe, they're still not going to want to answer you very honestly, probably, if they do look at it. But if they don't look at it, you're going to know. They're going to be like, never. Like, they're going to be almost offended at the question, right? And so I think that it's really important to ask these questions pretty point blank, because if it scares them off, it scares them off. Why would you want to waste your time? Why do you want to waste their time?
Well, let me say another thing when it comes to red flags. Like, not all of the questions are like, again, not everything's an ambush question on the most uncomfortable thing possible, right? There's a way to do this that is both direct but also like courteous. But this is why I go into this idea that once you've identified what you want, once you've actually worked on yourself to be the sort of person that is going to attract the thing that you want, once you've gone to the areas of those common values and interests, now when you're working through this process, Tina and I had conversations about how many kids do you want to have? What do you think about bedtimes? What do you think about the role of the wife? What do you think? And we were honest about it because there was no point in not being honest about it. And I think that's something to where, again, part of this is putting yourself into the sort of environment where there's a certain degree of comfort with that, because there's a respect for the other person. And it's the idea of, look, I think this really could be something, but if it can't, and I'll give an example of this. I remember, and I won't say who it was, but I remember talking with someone and kind of, we were talking about relationship stuff. And we had given the same thing where it was like, look, don't get physical. Don't get physical. Learn how to understand and see if you can love the person for who they are, what they think, their hopes, dreams, aspirations, all those other things. Like really get to the bottom and the nitty gritty on what you believe, why, and what you want to do with your life and how you want to raise a family and build a family. And came to the conclusion that this wasn't, and I'm not talking like came to the conclusion 2 weeks later. I mean, we're talking like multiple months of investing in asking these questions and whatnot. And some of this was during COVID, so it had to be long distance and over the phone and whatnot, but investing real time in it and coming to the conclusion months later that, yeah, this just isn't going to work. And there wasn't all of this like animosity and heartbreak. Now, was there some feeling of a little bit of rejection and disappointment? Yes. But because both of them had respected each other physically, by not engaging in things that they shouldn't have. And because both of them respected the process that they were going through, right? It wasn't, we're going to get married one day, so let's figure all this out. It was, we both like each other. We have similar values. We have similar interests. Now let's figure out if we can build a relationship together. And what they concluded was they couldn't. And they parted as friends. Like there wasn't this heart-wrenching breakup and rejection and all this other stuff. They parted as friends.
There was no shame or guilt involved.
No shame or guilt. Both of them, and I would go so far as to say that both of them were actually better off for the process that they went through.
Right.
And this is an important thing to understand, is that there are going to be people that you might think, oh, this is a possibility. And you're going to go through that process. And what I would encourage you to do is that if you can be upfront and honest with the other person that, hey, listen, the reason why I'm doing this and the reason why I want to ask these questions of you is because I am interested in you. And I think we do have shared values. And I'm serious about wanting to be, I want to be a husband. I want to have a marriage. I want to build a life with someone. And if you think that's something you're interested in as well, I'd like us to, be respectful of one another and see if like this is something that we can find out. And you know what? That doesn't sound romantic to the world, right? That doesn't sound romantic to Hollywood. But go take a look at Hollywood. Are any of those people living, are any of those people really living the sort of lives or marriages or experiences or raising kids, maybe with a couple exceptions here and there, that you would want to implement? If the answer is no, then don't buy the crap they're selling.
Right.
And realize that what you need first is, yes, there's going to be those butterflies and whatnot, and that sense of vulnerability and getting to know somebody and being honest with them about what you want and basically let them know that you potentially want it with them, and opening yourself up to the rejection that maybe they don't want it with you. But if you can start off that process with, this is actually going to be kind of a fun exercise because we're going to get to know each other in ways that actually mean something. But if at the end of this, we decide that, hey, we're not right for each other in this environment, because we've respected one another, both, physically, emotionally, and the whole deal as we've gone through this, there's no need for us to have resentment toward one another. And I do think that actually makes it easier to kind of go through that process. And because I think what you will find out is the more you're talking about these things and you have these discussions, and when maybe somebody doesn't say something the way you thought they wanted, like, well, why do you say that? And then they explain it. It's like, oh, I've never thought of it that way. And in that process, your whole worldview is being enriched because, maybe you're finding out that you guys actually agree on all the fundamentals. And now you're just figuring out, what does that process look like to achieve what we want? And I know for Tina and I, we tell people this all the time. We had all sorts of ideas about, what we were going to do and how we were going to raise our kids and how we wanted to educate them and things that we wanted to try. And there are so many things that have changed or were forced to change by circumstances, sometimes because we came to the conclusion that we wanted to do something different, or by circumstances beyond our control, right? We didn't start the war. But here's what we found. Because we agreed on the fundamentals, and because we were able to identify potential red flags or cautionary things and talk through it and understand it, because we were able to understand that there were no deal breakers. That doesn't mean that everything was ideal, but there were no deal breakers. what happened is that when we came to those points where we were going to change course, because we had had a plan and because we had had something of a roadmap, when we had to change directions, it wasn't some catastrophic thing. It wasn't something where I'm looking at, well, I never knew you wanted that, or I never knew you had that we knew what the expectations were. And so when they had to change, we'd go through a process of explaining, hey, this is why I think this needs to change. And there was times where, again, we'd have to sacrifice or but the bottom line is once we had made that decision that, okay, yeah, you're the one. People ask us sometimes, how do you know that person's the one? When I married him. It's there, and there's something liberating about that idea that when, I knew I wanted to marry Tina. Obviously, at that point where I asked her and I talked to her folks.
I think that's what people mean is, how did you know she was the one you wanted to marry? I think that's what they mean when they ask the question.
No, I know, but like we went through that process of knowing that, values, interest, attraction, and wanting to build a life with somebody. And then at that point where the moment it was, I do, like that was it. And what was so beautiful about that is that all of those other, potential options of people you could have married or whatnot, like at that moment, that's all done. And now what you do is you get to focus on this whole new world that you are now tackling together with the person that you love. And it's a perspective and mindset change that is just incredibly liberating in one sense and exciting in another sense, and sometimes scary, but ultimately it's you two together. And that's the part where, again, the reason why we say go through these ideas of what are red flags, what are things to be cautious about, what are things to talk through, and then what are the deal breakers, what are the things where it's like, look, I know I can't build a life with somebody if this or this exists, or we disagree on something so fundamental that it's going to ultimately impact the way that we raise our kids together, or what we constitute as right and wrong, or what we consider to be acceptable things versus unacceptable things. But I guess the big thing I want to encourage people is don't be afraid to have that. But to get to that point, you got to know what you want, or you got to have a good idea, or you at least got to definitely know what you don't want, right? You got to have a good idea of what you want. You got to have actually put in the work to make yourself, again, my goal is to make myself in many ways worthy of what I believe Tina wants and deserves in a husband, right? Working on those things, going into the environments where it actually makes sense that you would find somebody, right? It doesn't make sense to say, well, I'm just waiting for it to drop out of the sky. Like going into environments where you're going to find those people, developing the kind of friendship that can then move into the sort of relationship where you're having these good discussions. And then ultimately that's how you know. That's how you end up knowing that this is the person I'm going to build a life with. And then when you make that decision, you just very simply, everybody else that could have been that person is no longer that person. They are not that person, and that's it. And she's the one, or he's the one. And the final question that we wanted to address is, okay, it's all fine and good for Tina and I to say that because we got married in 1999. We got married in the 20th century, right? And now it's the 21st century. Does it still apply? And here's what I would say. I think if you look at the full course of human history, you will find ideal times for people to find people and get married. You will find unideal times. You will find different across time and space and culture and all these different things. And to this day, there are very different ideas of what actually constitutes a good process for finding someone that you're gonna marry. I am willing to bet with any sort of currency that you would accept that everything we talked about here today works, regardless of the times and situations. Now, the degree to which you are going to find what we would say in the military, the degree to which you are going to find a target-rich environment may change drastically with what's going on in the culture and whatnot, and that may make things more difficult. And I never want to suggest that things haven't gotten more difficult, because I absolutely believe they have, but I don't think the principles change. It is unfortunate that the number of people that still believe in this may have been reduced. And I do think more and more people are recognizing that what they've been, the lie they've been sold doesn't work. But that doesn't mean the principles change. And so I would just encourage people that it will be harder. It may require a greater degree of vulnerability or frustration when you don't have a culture or a society that seems to reinforce the sort of things that you value and care about and that you want to foster and build in your own life. But like anything else, right? If it's worth it, if it's worth it to you, then you'll be willing to go through the difficulty in order to achieve it. And while I don't want to minimize the difficulty, I can absolutely speak for how worthy it is. That part I can speak about with absolute authority, is that, man, is it worth it? So I want to thank everybody. I know we've covered a lot of things. We kind of jumped all around the outline, and we always try to kind of go where we're kind of feeling like the conversation is leading and what'll be valuable to people. And hopefully this was valuable to Kat. Again, thank you very much for the question. And I hope that we've done a credible job of answering some of the concerns or questions that you had and addressing it a little bit more from the perspective of, that, again, that young woman that wants to have that traditional relationship in marriage and wants to find the right guy. And we certainly hope that you do, because again, it is totally worth it. So once again, thank you all very much for joining us. Please consider joining Circle. Again, we'd love to go and get ideas from our community. We've got over 1,000 people in there now.
And speaking of Circle, we have thrown around the idea of creating a singles tab, a singles chat in the Circle chat, because if you're here and you're listening to this stuff, chances are you've already been thinking about this stuff. You've already been doing this work, and other people are also thinking about this stuff, doing this work. And hey, maybe you might find them in Circle Chat in the singles tab.
While we're just throwing out shameless plugs for things, we don't do this that often, like ever actually, but like if you've gotten all the way through the end of this podcast and you're on YouTube, consider giving it a like or subscribing. It takes 2 seconds. It costs you nothing to subscribe. I was looking at Nick's figures today, and it's like 3/4, like 75% of the people that watch his content aren't subscribed to him. So literally it takes 2 seconds. It's free. I would love for him to get 1 million subscribers within like the next couple of months. I think that we can hit it. So yeah, I don't know. Just wanted
I'm
to throw
over
it out
here trying to be a matchmaker, and you're like, subscribe.
I have to throw it out because, and Hamilton will tell you this is true, I have to throw this out because Nick is never going to shamelessly plug his own channel to his own audience, so somebody else has to do it for him.
That's true.
Well, Liz, Christian, I appreciate it. I really do. And again, we do appreciate our audience. We appreciate them participating. We love, again, both those that watch, those that comment, those that actually join Circle and kind of go to that next level of just kind of, forming that sort of community around the sort of ideas that we're talking about and providing input. It's something that we really appreciate. So once again, hope this was helpful. Please let us know what you thought. And again, if we do need to, and we've talked about this on 2 levels, because we've had people come to us in the community and say, look, we like what you guys are talking about. We share the values, and we are looking for somebody. And hey, this is a community where we might find them. So could you help facilitate that? And we've actually considered that on Circle. If you think that's a good idea, let us know, and we will start to explore the next steps of doing something like that in a responsible fashion. And then the other thing too is that we've been pitching around the idea for a long time now of maybe one day actually doing some live events. And so if that's something else that you think that we should consider, please let us know in Circle. So once again, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.